Rhett vs Naniwa, Game 3 of their best of 3. This is the rubber match of the TSL3 round of 32. These matches occurred in mid-2011, and if you missed Game 1 and 2, they were really good. You can find those games on my channel on a playlist. I will also link them in the comments. In the opening salvo of this game, Naniwa scouted a massive roach drop from Rhett. Rhett was never able to get any damage done with his drops. Naniwa parlayed his defensive play into a macro advantage and beat Rhett with a nice little counter attack. Game 2, very interesting game where Rhett played defensive on Metalopolis and was incredible despite his lack of creep spread and getting hatch blocked early. He really showed that when he gets his economy, he was a player to be feared, going all the way back to the Brood War era. This game looking somewhat similar to the opening game as Naniwa has a probe patrolling at the natural, and much like Metalopolis, if you're looking at a third base here, it's sort of squinting your eye and saying, well, that is really far away from me to be able to defend. And you can't exactly take a hatchery at your natural in the same way on this map. There just isn't as much room. And Metalopolis was such a wide open map with the natural in the third. You could do something cute like that. And we saw Root Katz, the incredibly creative Peruvian player, would just love to do stuff like that, throwing hatches down all over the place haphazardly. Katz would even go 4 hatch before pool. That guy's an absolute sicko and really understands the game on a level that a lot of people don't. He's so fluid in his play. But going back to Rhett here, we notice that he went pool first. You might be saying, well, Venomous, you dope, he did take his base at his third. Well, crucially, he built a pool. Remember, last game it was hatchery first at the natural off kilter, and then he went into another hatchery after his pool. Well, in this game, he got that pool really quick, probably a 15 pool. He's not making gas. He's trying to go gasless opening. That was very standard in this matchup. And if you go pool first, your economy isn't as good, but it allows you to get lings out on the map and not get cannon rushed. And if you have an opponent who really wants to block your expansions with probes and annoying nonsense, it really doesn't take more than 1 or 2 probes to just indefinitely keep that natural from being placed. Because remember, at any point, Toss can just make a pylon. And God forbid if they really want to get under your craw, they can make a gateway or like a cyber core after the pylon. So as Zerg, that's why you're forced to make a pool. And that's one thing about sending an early probe scout as Toss, as Protoss players really understand the pressure of the probe scout. It's not like sending an SCV scout, or what is the SCV going to do, like at worst, make a bunker. You can sort of eliminate a lot of marine pressures just based on knowing your opponent and scouting. And a Zerg drone, what's the worst it's going to do? Like proxy a hatch? Like give me a break. A probe really has the ability to be a nightmare for you as Zerg, because not only can it prevent your early expansions from going down nearly indefinitely, but it can also proxy structures. And this one's really brutal. Back in this meta, because the warp gate was 4 seconds everywhere, not just on pylons with gates, the probe would oftentimes harass you early, block your expansion, and then very deceitfully leave and then go put a pylon down somewhere around your third or your fourth for Protoss to pressure you or all in you with later, because if they got a pylon down, it was 4-second warping everywhere, so you could turn a cute little pylon play into a devastating warp gate pressure, and it was so difficult to deal with as Zerg whenever you face Protoss players who were very diligent about sneaking pylons around the map. In this era, we saw really talented Protoss players sneak pylons around the map, not just to do a one big attack, all in, oh, here's where I'm going to launch these attacks from, these warp gate cycles. No. I'm talking about even against Terran, have a pylon here. For instance, on Sharkuras, you might hide it in the bottom left main if you're spawning in these same positions where your opponent's top left and your bottom right Protoss. You might also put it in the top right main, kind of in the corner where you can warp in on the low ground. Because if we look here, this is old Sharkuras Plateau, which was bad for Zerg. The difference being that the middle third base is way harder to take, the mid's congested, and crucially, there's a back path, and you can spawn in close by air positions and get siege tank push from that back path. Famously, we saw Genro do that to Idra in their GSL Classic, where this map was considered like pretty even and good for Zerg because this was the Steps of War era where things were just terrible for Zerg. But then when you spawn close positions versus Terran, it suddenly became like a really terrible for Zerg map. Nani doing something we saw in his original game where he gets the forge early to get the cannon and button up, but then he busts out whenever he wants to do his warp gate pressure. The same style of build going on for Nani, and this sort of pylon placement is what I'm talking about, where you hide it on one side of the water against the wall, and then you can warp in on the other side. It's just very, and then the second one coming down. And remember, you can warp in on high ground too. You can't just make cannons on high ground. So Naniwa doing a very sharp 4-gate timing, he can simply force field the bottom of this ramp. Remember, no Ravager, and Rhett knows this, so he's just going to try to bean dip, but the drones are just going to get massacred here. And this isn't really necessarily an all-in. Naniwa, this is more of a 4-gate pressure. But Rhett, again, going for Burrow and Galil Constitution at the same time. And whenever you watch Rhett's play, he's so consumed with getting the drones out, which all good Zerg players are, but whenever we see him in these games with Naniwa, it's sort of like, oh crap, he's about to move out and attack. I guess I'll start Roach Speed now, and I guess I'll start Burrow now as he gets a cannon. And it's just very easy to get caught off guard when you're trying to maximize the amount of roaches that you have. But Roach speed is just so important. We can see her off creep. They're just getting kited hilariously. And Naniwa can just run back up to this ramp, and oh my gosh, what a brilliant snipe on the sentry there, as Rhett could have just gotten massacred there, because that sentry did have enough energy to make force field, and Naniwa could have potentially warped in more there. But Naniwa trying to run away. Remember, no recall except on the mothership. And this is why Protoss players bitched and moaned endlessly for recall and, oh, if our attack, blah, 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 blah. So notice he still got away with some army. But the interesting thing I think to note is the Roach Burrow movement is on the way for Rhett, but so is a Robo. And whenever you're trying to play defensive macro Zerg and you don't have Roach speed started until your opponent attacks, you're pretty much going to take damage to any sort of thing that they do. And it's not like Naniwa had a third building while he attacked. That was a pretty decent commitment there to that 4-gate pressure. But it's not like it was an 8-gate. Like, he has his third and fourth gases, and he's in a decent position after killing that third. Remember, Zerg always wants to be a base ahead, and this is a map that's going to favor Protoss going into the mid and late game. Pretty congested. You are able to start attacks from the main. You can make stuff in that main base and warp stuff in up there. These bottom alleyways are just a dream if you're Protoss. This is a one force field choke, like give me a break. He lets quite a bit of army in, which probably is fine until he realizes that Rhett has Burrow. But again, you just force field that choke again. Force field so powerful, and the only way to really circumvent force field in this era was to get tunneling claws, which is almost done. Remember, no Ravager in this era, so Zerg can't just hurt derp. Oh, I'm gonna shoot a freaking bile at that force field, but the observer is out. So right when the Roach Burrow movement upgrades, the observer comes out. But a plethora of roaches are in the base of Nani here, but Red just has a tremendous way to reinforce. He doesn't have any overlords dropping creep. That third base that died is just now getting up, and he's going to push Nani back, and wow, he could really kill that Artosis pylon and make things hard on Nani, but he's going for the throat here. He's trying to kill the Stalkers. Remember, those are non-blink Stalkers, folks, but with an Immortal out, that's just going to be tremendously helpful for Naniwa. Immortals are so good at defending these pushes, but without a Warp Prism and without sentries and without an army to help support the Immortal, it goes down. Nice probe use from Naniwa. Remember, he doesn't want to pull probes until he absolutely has to, because then you're just losing a huge chunk of economy. He pulled just enough workers. That was really good worker micro. One of the hardest things to judge in all of StarCraft 2. And again, because Rhett went for this very economic focused delay my gas style to the extreme, he does not have Ling speed and he's down on workers. So Rhett is officially behind. He can't really keep doing this attack into this narrow off creep ramp, and you can see on the mini map here Rhett is starting to retreat. But it's one of these situations where you know as Zerg that you are behind, you don't have any workers at your third. Toss is starting to tech into Immortals, and you know you're behind on workers, you can sort of deduce that Protoss doesn't have a third because Rhett does have some units overlooking the high ground pocket third, those overlords as well. Those are 3 overlords too many, and losing those is brutal because you know he's going to run up to that high ground choke probably pretty soon, and thankfully, as Rhett, you do have that defended. Rhett, the intelligent Zerg player, always thinking a step ahead, but when you go for those gas openers, you really have to get so many crucial upgrades, and you're constantly trying to keep delaying gas to make more workers. And it gets to that point where, oh, Nani was attacking me with the pressure build. I don't have Ling speed or Roach speed. How the hell am I ever going to defend? Remember, the Queen has 3 anti-ground range. It's not like now where it's like, how is he going to defend? He's going to have 6 forward Queens. Nope, not in this era. And remember, the Queen being worse means that your creep spread is going to be worse. And this is what I was talking about, where Naniwa can just launch attacks from this high ground. It's so hard to engage here if you're Rhett. Nani can just camp this high ground and siege your upper mineral line. But Nani knows that he has the unit advantage. He can run in here with a beautiful sentry. Just did so much work there with the Guardian Shield. Remember, when you face a Roach Hydra army, having that one Guardian Shield is the equivalent of 2 upgrades, like having 2 armor upgrades. So not only does Nani have the better army as he crushes Rhett's third and Rhett's Roach Hydra force, but he basically has a huge upgrade advantage just because of that one spellcaster. And because of the weird terrain of Sharkuras Plateau and the nature of Rhett's third being killed and him not having as much stuff as he normally would in a game, Rhett was in a position where he knew he had to defend the third, and he knew that pretty much the game would swing on whether he would be able to defend the third from a position that was nearly indefensible. And you might be asking, well, how is this position so good? Well, this is why they changed Sharkuras Plateau, and they made it where you didn't have that little back path. You couldn't launch pushes from the back path, and we see that even in a game where they didn't spawn in close positions, the back path is being used to brutalize Zerg and being used by a Protoss or Terran player to attack Zerg in a way that is abnormal and makes it very hard to defend. Also note Naniwa's third placement. It's down there at the 6 o'clock. Because you can take that safe base and you're going to rendezvous all your pushes through that little area, and you're going to reinforce through that area, and if you control that area, you're going to control the whole map because your front door is already buttoned up. You can't do anything as Rhett. Not only can you not defend your own third as Rhett, but you're in a position where it's going to be very difficult to attack down a one gateway choke and ever kill that base. So Rhett is in a brutal position. And I do a lot of old games on this channel, and this is definitively not the beta era in 2010. This is mid-2011, like I said earlier, but we can see here some of the map imbalance that Zerg still had to deal with on maps like Sharkuras Plateau. They might not have spawned in close, but this wacky little back path really paid off for Naniwa. Rhett was in a position where he was a little bit slow to react to Naniwa's first push out. That's a great example of if you play Protoss and you do a pressure build, oh, I'm going to open 4-gate pressure with some sentries. That's what you expect to happen and want to happen in your game. You catch your Zerg opponent off guard, you kill the base, you retreat, you take a third base. Not only that, but you kill all of his workers at his third, and you kill a lot of his army to nullify and gut a counter. And because of the nature of the map, going out and taking your third base is really easy. Because a lot of times when you're Zerg and you lose that third, it's like, now I have a bunch of crappy roaches and lings. Well, I guess I can counterattack if he pushed me off 2 bases and is trying to take his third. Well, on Sharkuras, there was really no third base to be pushed. You're never going to be able to break that base. And now Naniwa simply opens up his front door, and he knows that that middle base is going to be very difficult for Rhett to defend. Nani is just going to run up there, get up by the base, and notice how chodish this is. It's very short, very claustrophobic. It's going to be impossible for Rhett to defend on the ground here because of force field. And even though he got Roach Burrow, which was sort of the Zerg answer to Force Field, it doesn't matter because once Protoss gets to this point, you can burrow your Roaches and try to move them under your opponent, and the Roaches are just going to get eviscerated by the army. And while the Roaches burrow movement under the Force Fields, your Hydras just get macerated. So this was a great example of why Roach Hydra style was very flawed in this meta and in this era, and I think it really shows how strong Ravagers are. And Ravagers just fundamentally changed this matchup in a way that I don't think necessarily was good, as we see the classic force field where you just cut up the Roche army, the front half is just going to get bombed, and Rhett's army wasn't even big enough for the back half to become out of range. So Nani probably going to warp in again, hotkey it with his main army, and just A-move the shit out of Rhett here. Rhett putting up a good fight. A lot of players would have left after losing that third, but there was really no way for him to come back as Naniwa does a big aggressive blink forward as Rhett GG's, and Naniwa defeats an established talented macro player to move on in the TSL. So that was Rhett versus Naniwa, the rubber match, and we can see that when you play a very defensive macro style like Rhett, it's actually pretty easy to get caught off guard. And whenever you delay pivotal upgrades like link speed and roach speed, that's one of those things that even at the pro level can be very dangerous. For us lower level players, you don't even try that shit, you know. You get the gas a little bit earlier, you get those upgrades every single game, and for Rhett, a little bit caught off guard by Protoss, and Naniwa parlayed his advantage into an advancement. Make sure you sub for more and check out the other games of the series.